It's been 3 weeks since Chancellor Angela Merkel announced the initial restrictions on contact. Now they're being largely extended. Social distancing rules will remain in place until May 3rd. Groups will remain limited to 2 people, and at least 1.5 meters must be kept from others. From May 4th, schools will gradually reopen, first for school leavers in primary and secondary education. Daycare will remain shut. Religious gatherings will also remain banned, while major events, including Germany's beloved football, will be called off until August 31st. Meanwhile, restaurants, cafes, theaters, cinemas, and music venues will keep their shutters down. Only shops up to 800 meters squared can reopen from Monday. Face masks are also being recommended in shops and on transport. Announcing the amended restrictions, Chancellor Angela Merkel warned against complacency.
What we've achieved is an interim success. No more and no less. And I emphasise, it is a fragile interim success. This has now determined our deliberations that there should be no rushing forward, even if it's with the best intentions. We have to understand that as long as there's no vaccine, we have to live with the virus.
Controls along Germany's land borders with its neighbors in the Schengen free travel zone will also remain in place for another 20 days. So, how do people in Berlin feel about the new measures? I'm not surprised, and I assume that it will continue on like this. For us, it's okay. Easing the restrictions is more difficult than the shutdown. It's like being on a diet. When you're strict, it's okay, but the moment you start loosening the rules is when the danger starts.
But definitely, I'm looking for the bars and the clubs again. Definitely.
For now, Germany will continue keeping its distance.
DW political correspondent Emmanuel Chaz has more on this story for us. Emmanuel, small steps here back to normality. How are people reacting to the government's plans?
Well, I think they weren't really surprised that, for example, social distancing would be reconducted, would go further. But of course, the announcement that, for example, some stores might be able to reopen in the coming weeks, that comes as a relief for those people working in those industries. And also there's a relief, for example, for some parents, for some students, that key classes, for example, final years with exams will be reopened at the beginning of May for those of the students who have exams to pass. Now, it's worth noting that more than half of the German population was actually happy with the restrictions currently in place, with even around 10% wanting even more stringent measures. So they weren't being taken by surprise that the social distancing measures were reconducted.
The government, Emmanuel, is recommending wearing face masks on public transport, for example. Why isn't that mandatory if it's considered so important?
Indeed, the government stopped very short of making it mandatory, but Angela Merkel highlighted the fact that we are seeing more and more people wearing masks, even without it being made mandatory by the government. There's, of course, the example of neighboring Austria, where people, for example, are being handed masks at the entrance of supermarkets. And since stores here in Germany can only reopen once they've made sure that they respect social distancing and hygiene rules, we can very well imagine something similar, and that people of their own will wear masks without it being mandatory.
Will these measures that were announced yesterday be imposed across the country, or will German states continue to implement their own rules?
Well, they will be implemented across the country indeed. However, this is up to the 16 states to be responsible for doing so. For example, how, which and where schools will reopen is up to each region, each German state to decide. And of course, this will all depend on the evolution of the pandemic. If the curve stays flat, if the number of infections don't increase, then more and more places will be able to reopen, and there will be a new evaluation of the situation on April the 30th. But Angela Merkel warned that as long as we will have to live with the virus with no perspective of a vaccine or of a cure, this won't be back to normality.
Emmanuel, thank you very much. That was DW political correspondent Emmanuel Schaz.